Hello, everyone, and welcome to the online discussion run by the NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence. This is a discussion in a series of discussions where we will talk about how different countries are addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we will hear from Israel, Iceland, and Germany how they are handling the coronavirus from government perspective and what has been the society's response. My name is Eli Nilange Yonatamishvili, and I am senior expert at the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence. And today I am joined by speakers, Mr. Yarden Vatikay, who is a strategic communications expert from Israel. And up until last year, he ran the National Information Directorate under the Prime Minister of Israel. Welcome. From Iceland, we have Mr. Kjartan Hreinn Njalsson, Assistant to the Director of Health. Welcome. And from Germany, we have Ms. Sudha David-Wilp, who is the Deputy Director of the German Marshall Fund's Berlin office. So good afternoon to all of you. As I understand, we are competing right now with President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, for his live nation address. So we are yet to see which one will start first, and I hope we will not lose half of our audience. But anyway, we have just 1 hour and lots to go through. So instead of presentations, we have agreed with speakers that we will directly go into questions posed by me, and then we will take questions from our audience. So those of you who are watching us live, depending where you are on YouTube or on Facebook, you can post your questions in the comments section, and then I will forward them to our speakers. So let me start the discussion. And my first question will be about these past 2 months. What is your assessment? Has this been largely about crisis communications or actually about strategic communications? So have we been living in a moment, or would you say that your country has been doing strategic maneuvering, engaged in reaching a predetermined goal? And I will ask Mr. Vatikay to give the first answer, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina. Well, I think Israel in this sense is a unique country. It's, I think, better positioned because our regular routine is what we call emergency routine due to the security issues here in Israel. And, you know, life-saving instructions are from the government is not too rare here in Israel. You know, when you're under rocket fire or things like that, the government provides life-saving instructions to the people, and therefore we are pretty regular to that. And also we're very fast in moving from, you know, routine regular times to emergency mode. So in this sense, we're I think pretty unique in the world for doing so. And it's as well also in the field of communication. And communication, of course, is a communication strategy is a key factor to this event, right? Its effectiveness has direct impact on life-saving efforts. But, you know, Israelis are pretty skeptical. Maybe they'll give you credit or they'll give you credit in the first stage, but you have to work very hard to keep this for the long term and to have a very sophisticated and flexible communication strategy. This is what is needed, and therefore we're in this phase right now.
Thank you. Can I ask, please, Mr. Njalsson to continue with answer from Iceland?
Of course, thank you, Lina. Well, we were fortunate enough in Iceland to be somewhat ahead of the curve when it comes to the outbreak. We were expecting an outbreak to occur early on. So our communication effort were mainly in the vein of strategy. We wanted to inform the people what our response would be when we would have our first infection. We wanted to inform the people about our preparedness, how we were preparing the society for the eventual outbreak. And also, when it comes to the outbreak itself, we caught those first few infections in Iceland extremely early. When that happened, because we had been extremely proactive in providing information about our tool set, about how we would conduct contact tracing, how we would perform the isolation and quarantine efforts, and of course, how we would communicate the status of the outbreak. We feel that when we had the first confirmed cases, the impact on the society was much less than it would have been had we not been proactive in providing information. So the strategy has been to provide the public with information beforehand, before we see the expected results, and the results have been expected so far. We have been fortunate in that regard. But yes, the main idea and the main focus of our efforts in terms of communication has been to inform the people about their role in the outbreak. All these methods and measures to contain an outbreak are reliant on the people being participating in them, that the people feel a sense of community, because otherwise these actions and measures will not work. So that has been our main effort, and we have been fortunate enough to have been able to avoid a crisis situation. So it has mainly been about strategy and talking about things that will happen, hopefully, in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. So let's hear now from Germany. Ms. David-Wilp, what's your take on how German government has handled this? More crisis communication or strategic communication?
Thank you, Alina. I'll take the diplomatic route and say it's been a mix of both. I believe at the outset, it was certainly a little bit of crisis communications. As you may know, public health is left in the hands of the state governments in Germany. It's a federal system here in this country. So at the beginning, it was a bit reactionary. Each state government was sort of issuing directives, talking, having press conferences. But then I think on March 16th, when Chancellor Merkel took to the airwaves to address the nation, something that was very unusual, she usually only does that on New Year's Eve, she addresses the nation. It stopped being sort of a crisis communication or saying that this is a crisis, but now let's shift as a nation to being more strategic. So, you know, she said this is the biggest challenge that Germany has had since World War II. And since then, you see that there's been more coordinated effort between national and local authorities, and also always backed with science. Chancellor Merkel has surrounded herself with science. There's the Robert Koch Institute, the Public Health Institute here in Germany, but also leveraging science all over the university professors and practitioners for the so-called Corona Cabinet that Merkel established on April 20th. So I think, you know, now you've had a shift from crisis communications to strategic communications in Germany.
Okay, thank you. And just as a short follow-up question to all of you, can you name something that you would consider your country gaining a strategic international advantage during this pandemic?
Maybe I'll open. I think the answer is yes for us. First of all, it's important for us to see how the world, it's always important for us, for the government, as well as for public opinion, to see where Israel stands vis-a-vis the world in this sense. Second, there's a lot of messaging, mainly by the Prime Minister, about Israel's position, and as he frames it, one of the leaders in the world. Because we were really one of the first, you know, for instance, to ban tourists from China and all kinds of other steps. And therefore, the equation between where Israel stands and how Israel treats and how the government treats its citizens, and in this sense, vis-a-vis the world, is a key point in the strategic communication of the Prime Minister and the government.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Other views?
Yes, I can echo that from Yarden. It's what we consider to be the best international thing or connection that we have with regards to the pandemic is that we would like to share our experience, and we have been trying to do that both via the international cooperation and also through international media and such. We want to reflect. We want to see how other nations are doing. We want to see other nations take measure of our approach and vis-a-vis. And also, we have been trying actively to promote our efforts not because we have done such an excellent job, but we believe that some things that we have done could be scaled up and done in a incredibly effective manner in many nations. So we have been trying to do that through the international cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Yeah, Alina, I think there's probably two areas where Germany has been recognized internationally. One would be how quickly the country passed an economic relief recovery package at the beginning of the crisis, and there was, mainstream political support for it across the board, both for big companies and even freelancers. I think there's a statistic from the IMF that about 34% of Germany's GDP was assembled to provide relief for the country during this time. And then secondly, the country has just been also been marveled at for its resourcefulness in terms of ICU bed capacity, the massive amount of testing, and also now pivoting to antibody testing. So I think in that sense, there's on two fronts, both thinking about the long-term economic effects that's going to follow this crisis, as well as the here and now of managing the health crisis.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question will be about the boldest decision that you believe your government took in the course of this pandemic so far, and what this decision was, and what were the mechanisms used to weigh this decision, whether to take it or not, and how to implement it. I'll probably give floor to Iceland first this time.
Thank you. So there are a lot of factors that come into play, because most decisions during a global pandemic and even a local outbreak like here in Iceland are bold and difficult. So if I look in the rearview mirror, I can say that now the expert-led approach was quite significant. I believe that was a pivotal factor in ensuring and maintaining the trust of the public. Whether that decision was premeditated or was it organic in development, I cannot really say, but that is the situation that we had and have now. But it has become clear that the expert-led approach has been extremely beneficial. What we have also found out is that despite that the expert-led approach that we have, you need to make sure that the government, ministers and so forth are trusting of the people at the forefront of the response, and that they themselves, the experts, they have to be open about their dealings with representatives of the government, because it is clear that without the government's approval and insight and oversight, you cannot have effective infection control measures. So it is a positive symbiotic relationship where one individual derives confidence and guidance from the other. I doubt that this is something that people who are experts in communications are not aware of, but it is certainly interesting to have seen it in action here in Iceland.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Vatikay, what do you think it's been for Israel, the boldest decision?
I want to talk about 2 points, maybe the boldest and the most controversial in this sense. Maybe the boldest would be one of the first, in the first stage, is to stop, flights from, it's disconnecting Israel from the world. And from the world, it means, first of all, the first step is with China. And then the debate was the US. Now, the US is, the best ally of Israel. It's also a very political decision in this sense. And therefore, it was a big debate. It was a pretty bold decision. And the decision of the government was then, okay, so let's do it to the whole world in that sense, or mainly Europe, which is infected, and the US. And I think this was very, in the more of a psychological way, it was a big shock to the Israeli public, and it was a very bold decision by the government. The second one is actually today, and it's a very, very special day today. Today is the day of memorial for soldiers killed in battle and for victims of terror in Israel. It's maybe one of the holiest, if not the holiest day of the year to Israelis. Holy in the civilian way in this sense. It's not a religious holiday. There are about 25,000 dead people, many of them young, and families go to the cemeteries. The government decided to close the cemeteries today. Now, you have to understand the effect of this decision. It's huge, it's very controversial. It's the first time ever they're doing. It's in the issue that is the most delicate issue to anybody. Is the soldiers are killed or whatever. And it's, I think, one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial, and also boldest decision that the government has taken, and it's today.
So has the government actually offered any alternative of how to commemorate and honor these people?
Yes, but yes. So they asked the families to come a couple of days before and after, but again, it's marginal. The big story is for the first time, and it's really sacred here in Israel. After wars and everything, it's really sacred to have these families banned from going to commemorate their lost ones in the cemeteries. It's a very controversial decision. It still is a controversial decision, even though they gave other alternatives. It's not the real thing for the families and for society.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. David-Wilp, what it would be for Germany, the boldest move?
Sure. I mentioned the economic package. I mean, for a country that's very averse to taking on debt, I think Germany had to be bold, saw the storm coming behind this health crisis. And that's one, I would say, one bold move. But I think that we're at the bold move now because the country is now in the process of loosening the lockdown. And I think one thing we'll have to watch is, will people be bold enough to accept using a mobile app for tracking the path of the virus? And this, for a country that, again, is also very sensitive to data privacy, will people be bold enough to trust the government, to trust authorities, to be conscientious with their data?
So, if I may, then
also a big story here in Israel. Also,
yeah, I actually wanted to go back to you, Mr. Vatikay, right, because I also read about it. It's a big story about the government passing the emergency law allowing to use the mobile data. So, can you comment on that a bit?
Right. Yeah, it's not only that; it's who they gave it to. The government asked the General Security Service to do so. So that's the main body who fights terror in this sense, but it has the mechanism, the means to do, the only one probably in the apparatus that has the means to do so. And it was a highly controversial, and I'm not sure it's highly controversial. It was controversial. Why isn't it highly? Because first of all, it's accepted that the security services work to defend the people. Second, the government said, and I think convinced the public, that it's okay. The data, the information, would not be used for other means, and also not only for other means, it would not be passed to other people, and it would not track people who are regular people in this sense, only on the worst case scenarios in this sense. And I think the debate was more in the press than in the public in this sense.
I can comment on that also. When we were developing our app, we were extremely aware of the data protection concerns. So we developed our app with guidance from the Data Protection Authority. And also, like in Israel, apparently, we felt that there was certainly some concerns about the app and how it would be used. But our approach was to be extremely transparent. We published the code, did it open source, had the code vetted, and so that was the thing that we took from that: be open about everything regarding the app.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll move to the next question, and you already touched upon it a little bit. So it's about the societal response. So how do you evaluate the societal response to the pandemic in your country? And what do you think were the government's expectations, how the society will behave beyond, obviously, complete compliance? And you already touched upon some controversial issues, but maybe you want to tell us more. So I'll ask Ms. David-Wilp to take the floor, please.
Sure. I think, for the most part, Germans have been quite law-abiding citizens and have been making an effort to follow the directives from the governments, both federal and state. But of course, there has to be some teeth behind these measures. The police has been patrolling, and there are fines being issued for people that don't follow the rules. But, I think it's also cast into question in terms of civil liberties. This country has been through a dark history, and dictatorship looms large here in recent history. So I think politicians are very careful to not tread too heavily on people and tell the citizenry we understand. And Merkel, in fact, mentioned to the Bundestag earlier or last week that she realizes it's an imposition on democracy, but everybody needs to sort of act as a collective to fight this pandemic.
Okay, Mr. Vatikay, you already spoke about some issues. Is there something more you'd like to add?
Always. So first of all, I think the expectations from the government is that the public will understand and comply. As I said in my opening remarks, in this sense, it's a country in which things like that happen pretty, not really rarely. These are instructions, and they're framed as instructions. They're just not guidelines to the people, and they were framed from the first moment as instructions to the people. So it's important. Now, we see in polls that are everywhere here that the majority of the public gives its trust to the government. There's a lot of debate going on whether the management of the whole issue is good or bad, but the public in polls gives its trust to the government, saying they're doing a good job, and we believe you on a general level in that sense. Now, as time goes by and things evolve, there's less and less patience. This is what we see right now from the people, and there's less compliance also. These are, again, specific days today, which the government has tightened the screws here. Memorial Day and Independence Day tomorrow, but the people are out there. What is becoming very controversial is the economic plan right now. This is the next stage, because we were until now in the stage of the phase of the COVID-19 and everything. Now most of the debate has passed to the economic level, and here begins a very big debate, and the public does not see it as it see it on the pandemic issue in this sense, and the trust in the government and everything. Probably we'll see it also in poll in the near future. Okay, thank you. Mr. Njalsson.
Yes, I can't agree more with what Yarden just said. We are experiencing extremely similar things in Iceland. We are moving away from the official pandemic response, and now we're looking at the political side of such an event, about stimulus packages, about the efforts of the government, how they are going to help the nation through this time. So there is definitely going to be a shift in the way people are observing a official response to the pandemic. So that is something that we are going to see develop over the next few days and weeks. But with regards to the outbreak itself, the best way in my mind to evaluate the response to the outbreak is to look at the status of the outbreak. From that we can deduce how people have been observant of our guidelines, of our measures. Are they participating? And we can see that the population in Iceland has made a tremendous effort in helping us deal with this outbreak. So we have had minimal requirements for police to patrol the streets and give out tickets and things like that. And another indicator for a societal response is the trust that people have in the official response and the experts who are orchestrating that response. The trust has been measured here in Iceland via polls and remains at around 90%, which is phenomenal, of course. But again, like Yarden said, we are moving into a new phase. We are moving into a phase of transition and of even more concern than before, perhaps. Now we're dealing with the livelihood of peoples and how they are going to be affected in the long term. So that is an immense and complicated mission that we have undertaken.
So since Mr. Njalsson mentioned policing effort, I wanted to ask how it's been in Germany. So has there been a lot of breach of government's restrictions? Has there been a lot of work for the police to do? How much are they actually patrolling?
Right. I mean, as my fellow panelists noted, I think the trust in government went up because, you know, everybody sort of rallies around the flag when there's a emergency situation. And Merkel's approval rating is at 80%. So, and most people do agree with the directives that the government has issued. But now, as my colleagues have noted, you know, during the loosening stage, there's more questioning. Well, if this industry can open, why can't our industry? And there's a lot of inherent contradictions sometimes in the guidelines that have been rolled out. For example, when it comes to schools, like how are schools supposed to maintain hygiene standards when there are not enough soap or sinks available for students to use? So now you hear these sorts of criticisms in terms of protest movements, like I see in my own country back in the United States. That is not the case in Germany, but there have been incidents of police breaking up parties in parks or, you know, house parties. Of course, that's happened, but not to the scale of what you sometimes see and what you see in the news reports in the United States.
Okay, thank you very much. So the last question that I want to ask to all of you is about what do you think has been the core lesson that your country has learned so far? I'll probably ask Mr. Vatikay first.
First of all, someday in the near future, probably in Israel, maybe in other places, there will be an investigative committee, and, you know, there'll be a big debate about it. But touching, I would say, the main problem, and it's mainly a communication problem, a strategic communication problem of the whole treatment of the government, was dealing with specific communities. The most susceptible community in this case is the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel, which is in many sense alienated to the establishment, to the government, to police sometimes. And their response was very slow. And the rate there, the infection rate is very high. What happened, and they have big families, so the contagiousness is very problematic. What happened here, and I would say the main understanding, is that you cannot have only one communication strategy. You have to know your people, you have to know your society, and if you have communities that are more marginal and less connected, or sometimes less trust and trustless the government, you have to formalize a special communication strategy for them. You have to understand who are the influencers in these communities. You have to understand what is the media, because if you post on the regular media, it doesn't mean that it gets to these kinds of society. And there's I would say the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, were in a very problematic situation up until now when things became better, mostly because of a lack of communication strategy, a viable communication and a tailor-made communication strategy to them at the beginning of maybe even before the beginning, because it was during the holidays in which the Orthodox community is celebrating more than the secular one, that the contagiousness was pretty impactful and things deteriorated in there. If we had on the first phase a better and a tailor-made communication strategy, I think things would have been better. I think it's a main lesson to be learned.
So what do you think was the breaking point here in communication with this group, or let's say in their behavior change? Because I understand there has been a behavior change. So what do you think was the kind of breaking point? Was it because they saw what is the effect of pandemic and eventually just decided to change their way of life? Or was it actually a result of government persuasion? What would you say?
It was a result of a couple of things. First of all, they understood what happened to them. They understood what's happening to them. They didn't understand it before. Now they understood it. Second, their rabbis, the main influencers there is not the media and it's not the government, it's the spiritual leaders. And the spiritual leaders on the first stage did not understand because the effort was not really good to convince them. And they said, no, they have to continue study the Bible, Torah. And if they continue study, they'll be together and the virus will move to one another. So first of all, it was the understanding of the rabbis that they need to change and even sacrifice the holy virtue of studying Torah, studying for the sake of saving lives. Second, and it's very important, very interesting, it was a total image breaking in Israel. What happened is that the military entered the cities, entered the Haredi cities, the ultra-Orthodox cities, in order to help them. Now, they are, again, pretty alienated to the army, but what happened here is that they started to know each other. And in this sense, vis-a-vis, both sides, the Haredim to the military people and vice versa in this sense. And the trust was better. If the trust is better, you let them help you in this end and not think that they come there to make you secular in this sense. So it's an image breaking. It was very interesting, but it helped very much contain the pandemic in the ultra-Orthodox cities.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Mr. Njalsson, what do you think was the core Stratcom lesson for Iceland that you took away?
Well, two lessons, I would say. The first one is similar to what Yarden says, that we, in the first stages of our efforts, we did not pay enough attention to alienated groups in the country, people who are in Iceland, non-Icelandic speaking groups. We have a large number of Polish people in Iceland, some of whom, many though, speak English, but not perhaps very good. Then we have people from Thailand and things like that. So there was a tremendous effort made by the communication task force at the civil service to provide information in their tongue, in their language. And we realized, unfortunately, quite late that we needed to do more to involve these groups in our actions, because again, this can't really be done if a large portion of society is not getting the message and not participating. The other point, which I believe is even more important, is the empowerment of the people. You should try as you can to make the people, the general population, a part of the team. Let them know that without their participation and hard work, it is impossible to contain an infectious disease like the one we're seeing now. The sense of community is extremely strong, especially with the population of a small island nation. And by appealing to that fundamental force, you can do quite remarkable things, as we have seen here in Iceland. So empower the people through any means necessary.
Okay, thank you. Ms. David-Wilp, what do you think is the core lesson for Germany so far?
Okay, so I'm going last, so I was thinking about lots of things, but I narrowed it down to three. I'll make them very quick. I think first order would be the stress test on the federal system when it comes to pandemics. Is it really good to let state governments take the lead? I think this has been a lesson that needs to be reevaluated within Germany. The second lesson is that, thank goodness, Chancellor Merkel is not a lame duck. I think Germans were very grateful to have a trusted leader in place that was able to show empathy and honesty. I mean, she herself went into quarantine after being exposed to her physician that tested positive for COVID-19. So she spoke from her heart when she addressed the German people. I think this has been a great lesson to have trusted leadership in the country. And the third lesson, which is still, there is no lesson, there is no answer yet, but for a country like Germany that's so dependent on relations with the rest of the world, what does it mean in terms of having sensitive industries in your nation. You know, this country has outsourced a lot of things to China, whether it be the production of masks or the production of pharmaceuticals. And what are the lessons in terms of collective mobilization within the EU? This pandemic has made us all nationalists in a sense. And what does this mean for a multilateral body like the EU?
Thank you very much. I'll ask just a couple of country-specific questions. And since Mr. Vatikay already stole my thunder and spoke about the Orthodox community and how they managed with this crisis, I'll ask a question to Mr. Njalsson. Bloomberg recently called Iceland the perfect laboratory for studying COVID-19. And it's because your country has carried out the highest number of tests for the coronavirus. And as we know, this is largely done by a private company, Decode Genetics, in partnership with the national health authorities. And I just wanted to ask, by the end of this pandemic, this private company will have an awful lot of data about people living in Iceland. So do you see any security risks in that, or any other kind of risks?
An interesting and extremely important question. Decode Genetics has been conducting genetic research on the Icelandic populations for many years now. They hold massive amounts of information, genetic information about the population in Iceland, and they have been using that information for some remarkable studies throughout the years. However, we have extremely good data protection laws in Iceland. We are quite confident that the company, which has such a good track record of keeping our data and our information safe, will continue to do so. All of this is, of course, done in cooperation and with the permit of the Icelandic health authorities. They would never allow people's genetic information to be compromised, and we have no reason to believe that that will be the case, especially since Decode Genetics has done an extremely good job of protecting that data so far.
Okay, that's good to know. And I also wanted to ask a follow-up question to you, if I may. How do you think all this information could be used to help the rest of the world? Because your advantage is the small population, so you can map pretty well how the virus entered the country, how it's mutated and all that. But how would that be, for example, of any use to, I don't know, let's say New York?
Well, we have to wait and see. We have our best scientists working on that problem right now. There is going to be a second wave of the virus. We have to wait and see how terrifying that will be. But hopefully that information will come in handy, because through genetic sequencing of the virus, we can trace the origin of each infection, and we can map out, hopefully, how this virus spreads, what are the most effective transmission routes for this particular virus. There are a lot of information that will become clear in the coming weeks and months, and probably years of studying this virus. And we are quite confident that the Icelandic contribution to that effort will be substantial.
Great. So there's the chance for Iceland to take a strategic advantage internationally. Yes. My last question will go to Germany, to Ms. David-Wilp. You mentioned that this pandemic has struck the German and the overall European economy pretty hard. Do you think that this will reawaken the populist and nationalist movements in your country? At the moment, it seems that they've lost the momentum as the German government earns a lot of political goodwill, as you told us, in how it's handling the pandemic. But do you think when the reality really kicks in, it will reawaken these movements?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Alina. I think the opposition parties have been sidelined during this crisis, not just the right-wing party, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, but also the mainstream parties like the Greens and the FDP, the Liberal Democrats. I think they're trying to find a profile because the government has sucked up so much of the oxygen in the room, rightly so, because they need to be present to talk to the electorate. And the AFD, in fact, has dipped below 10% for the first time since 2017. But I think it's just a matter of time before these parties find their voice again, as the government loosens the lockdown and navigates a way out of the crisis. And the German election is slated for next year. So I do think the AFD will have found its talking points by then. And it's not a party that is going to disappear anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to take some questions from the audience. We still have nearly 20 minutes left. One question that has been torturing me as well is about the second spike in coronavirus, assuming that there will be one, and a lot of scientists say that probably there will be another spike. What do you think your governments will do differently? Mr. Vatikay, let's start with you.
So first of all, we hope that due to the corona, we will have a government. You know that Israel, for the last year, has been going through 3 elections and could not achieve a government in this sense. What happened right now is the coronavirus made possible that the opposition went to the government, to the current government, and said, okay, so let's do a government of unity in this sense. And first and foremost, probably in a couple of weeks, we will have for the first time in maybe more than a year, a stable government, a unified government. So this is, I think, very important. This is important also for the public, for looking at your leaders as political systems, saying, okay, stop fighting, stop electing yourself, and start working together. And therefore, I think what we'll see here is, first of all, a more trust in the political system as a whole, and second, a more long-term strategy, managing strategy, operational strategy, communication strategy of the government for the next phases, whether the second wave or economic issues, because again, for the first time, there will be a stable government and no elections in the near future. And this will have, I think, a very strong impact and important impact, both on the public and also on the strategy, on the ability of the government to create a long-term strategy, including what you said, the second wave.
Okay, Mr. Njalsson, what is your take? What would maybe Iceland do differently if there's another spike?
It's a good question and a difficult one to answer. We do not, of course, know when a second spike in infections will occur. Will it occur on a global scale, or will it be a regional outbreak in certain areas of the globe? We do not really know. But I think it would be quite prudent and clear that when this first phase of the coronavirus is over, if we get some breathing room, it would be quite healthy for our community to have an open discussion of how our efforts were, how they worked, why we did what we did, what would we have to do better. It would be healthy for us to have this discussion in the open, engage the public. So when we have another spike in infection, we will be on the same page of what we need to do, how we need to do it, and eventually why.
So these next, let's say, measures, provided that they will be required, will be more informed by the public. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. David-Wilp, what do you think Germany might consider doing differently if there is a next time?
Sure. I mean, I think right now, Germany's testing the waters for loosening the lockdown, and some state governments are a little bit more ambitious than others. Merkel has been always a voice of caution. So if there comes a point where the infection rate goes up again, she's already given that information out to people that the health system will be overwhelmed by October, I think she said, if The infection rate goes up to 1.2. It's already hovering around 1 right now. So I think they'll certainly then revert back to a lockdown, and they may be more draconian than they were before. But on a sort of another level, on a granular level, as a mother too, living here in Germany, I do realize this country needs to invest more in its broadband and in terms of online learning. This country is an export leader. It's admired for its economic prowess, but it's a little bit in the last century when it comes to broadband access and digital learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There is a question which actually has been discussed quite a lot in different formats, but maybe you can give a very short answer about your country. Have you seen a lot of disinformation? Has it had any significant impact? Because I guess all countries have seen some form of disinformation going around, but have you seen anything that's had a significant impact on how the crisis is managed or how the society perceives it? Mr. Vatikay.
This event has a tremendous, unfortunately, has a tremendous side of disinformation and misinformation. Both misinformation, that means all kinds of information that is not correct going out there, and disinformation, that means deliberately fake news in this sense. It's a big issue here in Israel. I think it's a big issue in the world. I'm not sure it had it created a lot of impact, but in the first stages there was a lot of disinformation, and I think it did influence in trying to create what is called daylight between the people and the government. There was a lot of misinformation and disinformation in this sense. I think it's a big issue. It's an issue to study. It's an issue to study the mechanisms, how to develop mechanisms to combat disinformation, to put out specific outlets, websites, social media, saying here are the majority, the major disinformation items that are there. We are the government. We are telling you this is not true. And also from the point of view of the police and security service, trying to find the people who disperse these kinds of information and to make a public case out of it, because it is really horrible. And it is specifically harming when you deal with life-saving issues, because communication here saves lives. Good communication, effective communication saves lives, and bad communication, deteriorates in this sense. And therefore, the campaign of disinformation and misinformation is really life-threatening, and I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to do regarding this issue.
Okay, thank you. Ms. David-Wilp, have you seen anything significant in Germany in terms of disinformation?
Yeah, I mean, nothing significant in terms of affecting action on the part of the people, but I think policymakers are certainly aware that it's out there, and they're aware that it's happening from state actors like China and Russia, and even before the pandemic took place, Germany has been very vigilant when it comes to hate speech online. So it's high on the radar screen here in Germany, but I wouldn't say that it's had an immediate effect on the country in terms of causing havoc with misinformation or disinformation. But it's certainly out there, and policymakers are aware of it.
Mr. Njalsson, in my experience from the NATO Stratcom Center, working with Iceland, things are pretty calm out there. Not much disinformation.
No, it's not a lot, but there is also, historic precedence tells us that when there is a ill-defined public health event happening, such as a global outbreak of a respiratory illness, you will see a massive amounts of false news, misinformation. We saw that in 1918 to a great extent, and we were quite confident that that some sort of misinformation or something like that would prop up in Iceland at some point. That was one of the reasoning for having a early response and holding daily press briefings extremely early, because inevitably when there is a void, when there is an information vacuum, something will fill that vacuum, and most of the time it's not based on science what falls into that black hole. So no, there is not a lot of misinformation in Iceland, especially not in the public discourse, in the established media, and I doubt that there is a lot of it floating around on social media. However, we want to make an effort to find out where people are getting their information from. Is it from the local media? Is it from questionable sources? We want to find that out because we want to learn and do even better when it comes to communication.
Okay, thank you. I'll take another question. So one of our viewers is asking if you think that the governments have been too digital in their communication efforts, since not all audiences are, digital natives. But if I may add to this question, so one of the key groups under threat is the elderly. And yes, indeed, they are not very familiar with digital technology. So apart from information that's being broadcasted on television, what other means have your governments used, or maybe civic society groups have used to reach these people and help them and inform them? So probably I'll ask Ms. David-Wilp how it's been in Germany.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what was said before is true here in Germany too. There's a healthy media market in this country. The public broadcasters are strong. They accompany the government briefings, and every morning there's a briefing from the Robert Koch Institute, which an older demographic can watch on TV. But certainly there are also public service announcements outside on billboards, at tram stations, etc. So I think people are aware, and civil society has also taken action to help older people. And I think they even see it in the stores. When you go into a supermarket here, there are signs everywhere about how, you need to have a distance and hand sanitizer. So I think those are ways in which people that are not listening to Merkel's podcast or getting their news online, people are aware of what needs to be done during this time.
So you mentioned some civic society initiatives helping the elderly. Can you name something specific? What is actually being done?
Sure. I don't know about anything structured, but I did see in the news, for example, a lot of the young people that have been not in school right now. So young people have been volunteering and offering to go help buy groceries for elderly people, or even in the neighborhood. You see initiatives where if somebody in the apartment building needs something, older folks are checking. People are generally being more neighborly, and also, making masks and helping in that regard.
This is a great sign of resilience. Very good to hear that. Mr. Vatikay, what do you have to say on reaching the elderly population and helping them?
First of all, on the general population, on a previous question, Israel, is a very political society, deals with current affairs, and therefore the consuming of the media is very high. So in this sense, there's no problem, no problem of getting information to the vast majority of the population, not marginal groups in this sense. Television, social media, everything goes out there. Now, regarding the elderly, there's a huge issue here in Israel. Actually, the two main issues were the Haredim, which I talked about, and the elderly. We have a very high rate of contagiousness and people dying from the virus in the nursing homes, in the elderly homes, in the Israeli public. It's a very big issue because the perception is that they have been neglected in this sense. And there's a public, awareness of this, a lot of media attention to it. Again, what the government did is put some some high-ranking doctor as the head of this project in this sense, and he created a specific strategy for the elderly, and it's being implemented along with, again, the army, police, volunteers, and everything. It is one of the issues that are pretty controversial, and I think the government is being criticized for not seeing it before and creating a tailor-made strategy, not only communication, but a real strategy for coping with the effect of the virus there, and a communication strategy. It's a big issue, and it's a problematic issue, and the public thinks that the government has not done well in this case, and therefore the government did some new things like I described.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Njalsson, has Iceland been too digital, and what has it offered specifically to the elderly population?
Well, I don't believe we have been too digital. With regards to the elderly, of course, things are changing right now because people have been in home isolation maybe for 6 weeks or something like that, and now they're suddenly seeing that they might be able to go out not for another 4 weeks or something like that. So it's going to be even more trying over the next few weeks how we're going to get information to these groups. However, we have, of course, civil society and the sense of community, which we have been trying to promote through our communication efforts. We have also special organizations for the elderly, for the different types of underlying conditions that people might have. We have been actively engaging with these people to encourage them to bring proper and good information to their people, and we feel that has been quite successful. Off note, and it's quite interesting and something probably only that could happen in Iceland, the 3 people that have been holding the daily press briefings are the chief epidemiologist, the director of health, and the police superintendent who is in charge of the official response. These people have become local heroes in Iceland. These are quite regular people. We all know each other in Iceland. So these press briefings are some of the most watched content on television right now. They are broadcast live, of course, and we feel that it's not necessarily the information that is important that is promoted on these daily briefings, but just the fact that they are held on every single day, no matter what, is a grounding mechanism for a lot of people and a lot of elderly people who just feel that it is important to have that fixture in their life, the daily press briefing by these 3 people. So we feel that we are doing a good job, but we cannot forget that we are just really beginning on this journey. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we had indeed very dynamic and fruitful discussion, a lot of interesting information for other countries to take away and learn. I will just remind our viewers before we finish the live stream that this is one of many discussions that our NATO Stratcom Center is holding online these days. And this is definitely not the last one where we will look at specific country experience. With this, I would like to thank my speaker, Mr. Vatikay, Mr. Njalsson, Ms. David-Wilp. Thank you so much for making it and sharing your experience. Stay healthy, and the best of luck to you and your families in these hard times. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll send you an email when the next online discussion is due. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.